on the edge of the neon-lit city of Raxiv 9, a place known for its towering metal structures and noisy streets filled with all sorts of creatures. A human mechanic named Jason Rivers worked in the heart of a sprawling junkyard. Jason's shop wasn't fancy, but it was full of life. Everywhere you looked, there were half-dismantled machines, piles of scrap metal, and the smell of burning fuel. His hands were always dirty, and his face was usually smudged with grease, but Jason didn't mind. Fixing things was what he loved, and he was good at it, maybe the best in the entire galaxy. His latest project was unlike anything he'd ever worked on before. It wasn't just about fixing a machine. It was about giving someone a second chance. Zira, a young alien girl, had come to him with a request that many would have considered impossible. She was a member of the Yaren species, tall and elegant with 4 arms and large, expressive eyes that could light up even the darkest corners of a room. Once, Zira had been the best podracer on her home planet. She had the speed, the skill, and the heart to win any race. But all of that had changed in a terrible accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down. Pod racing was more than just a sport to Zira. It was her life. It was how she had proven herself to the galaxy. But now her dream was shattered. The doctors told her that she would never race again. The Yaren nobles, her family, had given up on her, deciding it was time for her to move on and live a quieter life. But Zira couldn't let go of the feeling that there was still a part of her that needed to race, even if her body couldn't carry her through it. That was when she found Jason. At first, Jason didn't know if he could help her. He wasn't a specialist in alien biology, and he had never worked with a racer who wasn't able to physically control their machine. But when Zira explained that she needed a pod racer designed specifically for her, one that could be controlled with her mind, Jason's curiosity was piqued. "It's impossible," he had said at first. "No one's ever done anything like that before." But Zira wasn't discouraged. "Maybe no one has," she replied, "but you can." "I believe you can." Jason had thought about it for a while. He wasn't one to back down from a challenge. And something about Zira's determination stirred something inside him. The next day, he agreed to take on the project. But Jason didn't just promise to build a pod racer. He promised to build the best one. The shop became a whirlwind of activity. Jason worked tirelessly, tearing apart old pod racers, scavenging for parts, and studying blueprints of old technologies. He wanted to design a pod racer that would not only be fast and powerful, but one that Zira could control using neural interfaces. It was risky, especially since Jason didn't have much experience with alien tech, but he was determined. For days, Zira visited him at the shop, watching as Jason worked. She could see the sweat on his brow, the way his hands moved with both care and speed as he connected wires and tested old engines. Despite her own struggles, Zira felt a sense of hope growing inside her. Maybe, just maybe, Jason could help her live her dream again. "Do you really think this can work?" Zira asked one afternoon, her voice filled with uncertainty. Jason didn't look up from the engine he was assembling. "I don't know yet, but we'll find out soon enough." He paused for a moment, wiping his hands on a rag before turning to face her. "You wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in you," Zira smiled. "You don't even know me." "That's true," Jason said with a grin. "But I know a fighter when I see one." Weeks passed, and the pod racer slowly began to take shape. It was unlike any other machine Jason had ever built. The frame was sleek, designed to cut through the air like a blade. The engines were powerful enough to reach speeds that few could survive. But Jason's modifications ensured that Zira would have the control she needed. The most difficult part was the neural interface, an advanced system that would allow Zira to control the pod racer with her mind. It wasn't just about connecting wires and programming systems. It was about syncing the pod racer's movements with the signals from Zira's brain. Jason spent sleepless nights working on it, piecing together alien tech and human ingenuity. The technology was still untested, and Jason had no idea if it would even work. But he knew it was Zira's only shot at redemption. Finally, the day came for the first test. Jason stood at the side of the pod, watching as Zira carefully positioned herself inside. The cockpit was designed for her, with a special chair that could support her paralyzed body, and the control panels were custom-made for the neural interface. The moment she connected her mind to the pod, Jason held his breath. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, Zira's fingers twitched. Her eyes closed, and she focused. The pod's engines hummed to life. It was a shaky start, but the pod moved. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Zira grinned. For the first time in a long time, she felt the rush of excitement she had been missing. But as she tried to push the pod faster, things went wrong. The steering was off. The pod veered to one side and then the other, shaking violently. Zira struggled to keep control, her mind working frantically to adjust the systems. But it was too much. The pod careened into a pile of scrap metal, sending sparks flying. Jason rushed over to her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Zira opened her eyes and laughed weakly. "I'm fine, but we have a lot of work to do." Jason smiled, relieved. He had known that the first test would be messy. But seeing Zira so determined made him believe they could do this. The next time it would be better. The next time they would be ready. Jason Rivers had always believed that his work spoke for itself. He didn't need to advertise. The machines he built were known to be the best, and that was enough. But when word spread about his latest project, a Podracer designed for a paralyzed alien girl, things started to change. Soon, his quiet workshop on Raxiv 9 became the center of attention. One day, as Jason was deep into a delicate piece of wiring, a tall, well-dressed figure stepped into his shop. The man was wearing dark robes and a slick silver badge on his chest that marked him as an official of some kind. Jason looked up, wiped his hands on a rag, and raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. The man smiled smoothly, his eyes sharp. "You must be Jason Rivers, the mechanic who's building the Podracer for Zira. I've heard much about you." Jason leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "I'm listening." The man's smile didn't fade. "I'm Ambassador Tarlin Voss, representative of the Galactic Council. I've come with an offer you might find interesting." Jason wasn't interested in anything the Galactic Council had to offer. He had spent years working in the shadows, away from politics and the glitzy lights of the galaxy's powerhouses. But Tarlin's presence was hard to ignore. He was polite, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. There was something about him that made Jason uneasy. "I'm not interested in your politics," Jason said, his voice steady. "I'm building this pod for Zira, and that's all that matters." Tarlin raised a hand as if to calm him. Of course. But that's exactly why I'm here. You see, the Starfall circuit is coming up, and Zira has shown the world that even a paralyzed racer can still compete. This is a moment that could unite the galaxy, showing that anyone, regardless of their species or condition, can overcome the odds. And we, the Galactic Council, would like to help. Jason narrowed his eyes. "I don't need your help." Tarlin nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Jason's face. "I understand. But let me explain. If you accept our support, we can ensure that Zira has the best chance of winning. We'll provide you with the finest technology, resources, and, more importantly, protection. No one will be able to sabotage her efforts." Jason felt a tightening in his chest. He had heard rumors of how powerful the Galactic Council was, and the thought of crossing them made him uneasy. But there was something about Tarlin's tone that made Jason suspicious. The diplomat was offering too much too quickly. "I'm not in it for fame or fortune," Jason said, trying to keep his tone firm. "This is about Zira, not some political game." Tarlin smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. "Of course. But consider this. Zira's victory would be a victory for us all. If you allow the Council to take control of the Podracer's design and future, think of the doors it could open. It would change everything for you, Jason. The resources, the recognition. You could build anything you wanted, and Zira, she could become a symbol. Something more than just a racer. She could become a hero." Jason's heart beat a little faster. The idea of having access to the best technology, the finest materials, and the backing of the most powerful political body in the galaxy was tempting. But it didn't sit right with him. He'd always preferred working alone, free of outside influence. "I don't need the Council's approval," Jason said. "I can build something on my own, something that Zira can control, without anyone looking over my shoulder." Tarlin's expression changed slightly, though his smile never left his face. "You're making a mistake, Jason. The galaxy is changing. You can either be a part of it or you can be left behind. The choice is yours." The ambassador turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before he exited. "I'll leave you to think about it," he said, his voice colder now. "But remember, Zira's future is tied to more than just a single race. If you want her to have a chance, you'll need to make the right decision." Jason watched the diplomat leave, the air in the room suddenly feeling heavy. He didn't like being cornered, and he didn't like the way Tarlin made it sound as if there was no other option. But Jason wasn't about to back down. He had come this far on his own, and he wasn't about to let anyone take control of his work, or Zira's future. For the next few days, Jason worked even harder. Every minute spent in the workshop, every modification to the Podracer, felt like a step closer to something bigger. But the shadow of Tarlin's offer lingered in the back of his mind. The Galactic Council was powerful, and if they decided to interfere, it could change everything. Zira, for her part, remained focused on what she needed to do. She continued to train with the pod, using the neural interface Jason had built to guide her movements. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Slowly, she was getting better. With each session, she grew more confident, but the pressure was mounting. Every day, more and more people arrived on Raxiv 9, some to watch the progress of the Podracer, others to see Zira in action. Rumors spread across the galaxy, and soon the Starfall circuit was becoming the most talked-about race of the century. And then, one evening, as Jason was working late in the shop, the door opened once again. This time it wasn't Tarlin. Instead, Zira stood in the doorway, her forearms crossed, a determined look on her face. "Jason," she said, her voice calm but serious. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not needing anyone's help. And I agree. But there's something I need to tell you." Jason wiped his hands on his apron and turned to face her. "What is it?" Zira stepped into the workshop, her eyes never leaving his. "I've decided I'm going to race no matter what. And I want to do it with your help, not the Council's. But if we're going to do this, we're going to do it on our own terms. I trust you, Jason, and I trust the work you're doing. But if we're going to win, we need to stay true to what we believe in." Jason smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Zira was determined, and he couldn't ask for a better partner in this. "We'll do it together," he said, his voice steady. The galaxy was about to witness something extraordinary. But Jason knew one thing for sure: this wasn't about fame, power, or politics. This was about proving that anyone, no matter their limitations, could achieve greatness. The days on Raxiv 9 grew hotter as the Starfall circuit drew nearer. The city's neon lights flickered like distant stars in a sky that felt increasingly far away from the calm simplicity of Jason Rivers' workshop. But for Jason, there was nothing simple about his latest project. Every hour, every minute he spent on the Podracer felt like a new puzzle to solve. Zira sat quietly in the corner of the workshop, her eyes focused on a datapad showing her the latest details of the upcoming race. She had been training every day with the neural interface, getting used to the way the Podracer moved, but even with her mind connected to the pod, the feeling wasn't the same as it had been before her accident. She missed the physical connection, the way her body had once responded so naturally to the pod's every movement. Now she had to trust the machine more than ever before. Jason glanced over at her, wiping sweat from his forehead. "How's it feeling?" he asked, stepping away from the workbench where he had been making some final adjustments to the engines. Zira took a deep breath, her fingers lightly brushing the console. "Better," she said, her voice quiet but confident. "But there's still something missing. It's like the pod doesn't quite understand me yet. It's like it's too stiff." Jason nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. The neural interface was advanced, but it still wasn't perfect. The connection between Zira and the pod was good, but not fluid. Not enough to give her the kind of control she needed to race with the speed and precision that was required to win the Starfall circuit. He crossed the room and knelt beside the pod, studying the control systems. The pod was sleek, shining in the dim light, built from rare alloys Jason had scavenged from ships that had crashed on distant planets. The engines were custom-made, powerful enough to push the pod to incredible speeds. But there was something else, something he hadn't thought about until now. "Zira, I think I know what's wrong," he said suddenly, his mind racing with a new idea. "The pod's not reacting to your thoughts quickly enough. The neural system is good, but it's not fast enough to keep up with the way your mind works. We need to make it more responsive." Zira raised an eyebrow. "Responsive?" Jason nodded. "Yeah, right now the pod is like a normal machine. It waits for your commands, processes them, then reacts. But it's not thinking with you. It's not moving with you. So I'm going to rewire it. I'll install a feedback system, something that will let the pod feel your mind, not just react to it." Zira's face lit up. Can you do that? Jason grinned. I can. But it's going to take time. And it's going to take more work than anything I've done before. If we want the pod to work as an extension of your body, we need to make it smarter. It's not just about speed. It's about understanding what you want even before you think it. Zira nodded, a spark of excitement in her eyes. Let's do it. Jason knew the job wouldn't be easy. He had to modify the neural connection to allow the pod to anticipate Zira's movements, not just follow her commands. It meant making the pod's computer smarter, almost like it had a mind of its own. But that was the kind of challenge Jason loved. The kind that made him push his limits and maybe even beyond them. He worked long hours, barely taking breaks. His hands moved swiftly over the parts, installing advanced circuits, rewiring neural connections, and installing a new feedback system that would allow the pod's AI to better sync with Zira's brainwaves. The room was filled with the hum of machines, the occasional hiss of steam, and the clinking of metal as Jason tinkered away. Zira spent her time practicing, learning to trust the pod's new system as Jason worked. She trained with the neural interface, using it to make small adjustments and movements. Slowly, she felt the pod becoming more connected to her. It was subtle at first, a slight twitch in the pod's speed or a more fluid turn. But as the days passed, she could feel the pod reacting faster to her thoughts. By the time Jason was ready to test the new system, Zira was eager to see how it would work. They made their way to an open area just outside the workshop, where Jason had set up a test track. It was a small course, but it had everything. Sharp turns, straightaways, and even a few obstacles to dodge. Jason helped Zira into the pod, making sure she was comfortably seated. The cockpit was built to hold her, with a special chair that allowed her to sit without straining her body. She connected to the neural interface, taking a deep breath as the system powered up. She could feel the pod come to life beneath her, the energy flowing through her mind. How does it feel? Jason asked, standing a few feet away, watching her closely. Zira took a moment, closing her eyes. Then she nodded. It's different. It's moving with me, not just for me. Jason smiled. That was exactly what he'd hoped for. All right, let's see what you can do. Zira hesitated for just a moment before pushing the throttle forward. The pod surged to life, the engines roaring as it shot down the test track. Zira's mind raced as she navigated the course. The pod felt alive under her control, responding instantly to her thoughts. She made a sharp turn, her body leaning into the curve, and the pod followed her instinctively. The feedback system Jason had installed allowed the pod to match her thoughts, reacting faster than she could have hoped. For the first time since her accident, Zira felt the rush of the race. She wasn't just controlling the pod, she was becoming the pod. The lines between machine and rider blurred, and the thrill of the race returned in full force. She could feel the speed, the danger, the excitement, all of it, and it was more real than she had ever dreamed. Jason watched from the sidelines, a proud smile on his face. Zira was flying now, every movement of the pod in perfect sync with her thoughts. The pod was everything he had hoped it would be, and more. But he knew this was just the beginning. There were still challenges ahead. The starfall circuit would be brutal, and Zira would face dangers that even the best pilots would fear. But Jason felt something deep in his gut. They were ready. When Zira finally brought the pod to a stop at the end of the track, she couldn't contain her excitement. She hopped out of the cockpit, her arms shaking with adrenaline. "Jason, this is incredible," she said, laughing. "I feel like I could race the stars now." Jason chuckled, wiping his hands on his shirt. "I'm glad you like it. But don't get too excited. We've still got a lot of work to do before the starfall circuit." Zira nodded, but her eyes were bright with hope. She wasn't just ready for the race. She was ready to prove to the galaxy that she could overcome any obstacle. And with Jason by her side, she knew anything was possible. Zira stood in the pit area, the noise of the crowd deafening as it echoed through the massive arena. The stars above twinkled brightly, and the engines of hundreds of pods hummed in the distance, each one getting ready for the most dangerous race in the galaxy. Zira could feel the weight of the moment on her shoulders, but she also felt something else, something stronger. It was excitement, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was about to race again, and nothing, not even the odds stacked against her, could stop her now. Jason was by her side, his eyes scanning the surroundings, making sure everything was in order. His hands were clenched tightly, but his face betrayed nothing but calm determination. This was his moment too. He had built the perfect Podracer for Zira, and now it was up to her to prove that it was as good as he had promised. "You ready?" Jason asked, his voice steady. Zira nodded, adjusting the straps that held her securely in the cockpit of the pod. "I was born ready," Jason smiled. It wasn't the usual cocky response he was used to hearing from competitors. Zira had a calmness about her now, a quiet confidence that had replaced the uncertainty that had haunted her in the beginning. She had trained hard, and she knew the pod better than anyone else. She was no longer the girl who had been sidelined by an accident. She was a racer again. The Starfall circuit was a legendary race that spanned across 5 planets. The course was brutal, filled with obstacles and dangers that no one could ever truly predict. The first leg of the race was set to take place in the asteroid fields around the planet Varnath, known for its swirling debris and deadly gravitational anomalies. The second leg would be across the volcanic deserts of Hydrix, then the icy moon of Terra. The final stretch would see the racers flying through a collapsing space station, navigating dangerous debris while avoiding sharp turns. It was a race that no one could survive without nerves of steel. But Zira was determined. She didn't care about the dangers. This was her chance to show the galaxy what she could do. The announcers' voices boomed over the loudspeakers, calling the racers to the starting line. The air was thick with excitement, and the stands were packed with spectators from every corner of the galaxy. Zira could hear the cheers, the chants, and the gasps as the other competitors, all seasoned racers with years of experience, made their way to their pods. They eyed her with skepticism, some laughing under their breath, clearly doubting her abilities. But Zira didn't care about their doubts. She only cared about proving herself. Jason gave her a last look, checking the pod systems one more time. "Everything's good," he said, though his voice barely hid the tension. "I've got this," Zira replied, her eyes locked onto the starting line. The pod's engines hummed as she tapped into the neural interface. She felt the familiar hum of the pod's systems syncing with her mind. The connection was perfect. It felt like an extension of her body. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The air was filled with a deafening roar as all the pods blasted off at once. Zira's pod surged forward faster than she had ever gone in training. The asteroid field ahead was chaotic, with massive rocks floating in every direction, some as large as buildings. The racers darted through the field, weaving between the obstacles at breakneck speed. Zira's mind was focused, her senses heightened. Her pod felt like part of her, moving with perfect precision. She could hear the other racers behind her, the roar of their engines and the screeching of metal as they collided with asteroids. But Zira remained calm, guiding her pod through the field with graceful ease. Every turn, every twist felt natural. The feedback system Jason had installed was working perfectly. The pod responded to her thoughts before she even fully processed them. The moment she thought about dodging an asteroid, the pod already made the move, gliding smoothly past the obstacle. A loud crack echoed through the comms as one of the racers behind her slammed into a large asteroid, their pod spinning out of control. Zira didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. Every second counted, and she had to make it through the first leg of the race before the others caught up. The second obstacle came into view, an enormous gravitational anomaly that pulled everything around it, making it almost impossible to maintain control. It was a danger that had taken many racers out of the competition in previous years. As the other pods slowed to approach it carefully, Zira didn't hesitate. She pushed the throttle forward, the engines roaring as her pod shot toward the anomaly. The gravitational pull tugged at the pod, trying to drag it off course. But Zira's mind was already ahead of the machine. She anticipated every shift in the field, adjusting the pod's trajectory with the slightest movement of her hands. It was like dancing with gravity, and she was in perfect harmony with it. The other racers watched in awe as Zira flew through the anomaly, staying on course while others were pulled off track. Her pod's smooth glide made her appear almost untouchable. As the field cleared, Zira shot ahead, leaving the others far behind. Jason watched from the pit, his heart racing. He had never been more proud of Zira. She was doing it. She was showing them all that she could race again. As Zira cleared the asteroid field and approached the next leg of the race, the volcanic deserts of Hydrix, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. The desert was a barren wasteland of molten rock and shifting sand dunes, where the heat was enough to fry the circuits of even the most advanced pods. The racers would need to navigate through the intense heat while avoiding volcanic eruptions and sudden fissures in the ground. Zira's hands gripped the controls tighter as her pod soared toward the next phase of the race. The desert stretched out before her, dark clouds of smoke rising from the volcanic craters in the distance. She didn't let the danger faze her. She'd trained for this. She'd trained for everything. As she approached the first of the eruptions, she saw the pod of another racer in her sights. This racer, a veteran named Orlan, had been known for his aggressive tactics. He wasn't going to let her win without a fight. Orlan pulled ahead, trying to box Zira in as he aimed his pod toward a narrow gap between two volcanic spires. Zira didn't flinch. She had a trick up her sleeve. She tapped into the pod's advanced sensors and boosted the speed for a quick surge. In a flash, Zira's pod shot forward, narrowly avoiding Orlan's attempt to cut her off. She had passed him. And now, with the finish line on the horizon, it was just her and the open desert. Jason's voice came through the comms. "Keep pushing, Zira, you've got this." Zira smiled to herself, her eyes locked on the horizon. She wasn't just racing for herself anymore. She was racing for everyone who had ever doubted her, for all the people who said she couldn't, and for Jason, who had given her the chance to race again. The final stretch of the Starfall circuit was in sight. Zira had already completed the volcanic desert of Hydrix, narrowly avoiding the eruption pits and shaking off the competitive racers who had tried to block her at every turn. Now, the hardest part of the race awaited. The collapsing space station surrounded by shattered debris and unstable sections of metal floating in space. Zira's heart raced as her pod hurtled toward the space station. The debris field was a maze with wrecked ships, broken parts of the station, and torn cables floating in every direction. It was a death trap for any pilot who wasn't quick and careful. Only the bravest or the most reckless would attempt this last leg of the race, but Zira had no intention of holding back. The pod responded to her thoughts with precision, its AI system perfectly synced with her mind. Every move felt like second nature. She could feel the cold vacuum of space around her, hear the hum of the engines as they fought to keep her on course. The stars outside the station glimmered like 1,000 tiny eyes, watching as she raced for glory, or perhaps disaster. Jason's voice came through the comms, steady as always, but Zira could hear the concern in his tone. "Stay focused, Zira. Don't let anything distract you. This is it." Zira nodded, though Jason couldn't see her. She couldn't afford to let anything distract her now. She had made it this far. She wasn't going to lose because of a mistake now. Ahead of her, the first section of the space station came into view. A huge piece of debris, once a part of the station's outer hull, drifted slowly through space. Zira's eyes narrowed as she saw another pod up ahead. Orlan, the aggressive racer who had tried to block her in the volcanic desert. He was just ahead, weaving between the large pieces of debris, trying to get a lead. Zira's fingers tightened on the controls. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. She had worked too hard to be stopped now. Without hesitation, Zira pushed the throttle forward, the pod surging ahead with a burst of speed. The engines roared as she darted between the floating wreckage, her mind sharp, focused. She dodged a large section of metal, the pod tilting slightly as the gravitational pull from the space station tried to pull it off course. But Zira anticipated every shift, guiding the pod through the debris with a steady hand. Orlan glanced over his shoulder and saw Zira gaining on him. His eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly regained his composure and tried to block her. He swung his pod to the left, cutting off her path and forcing her to slow down. But Zira didn't slow. Instead, she tapped into the pod's secondary boost system, the extra power Jason had designed for moments like this. With a sharp, decisive move, she shot forward, narrowly avoiding Orlan's pod and gaining an instant advantage. She was in the lead now, but she couldn't afford to celebrate yet. The space station loomed ahead, and the next section of the race would be the most dangerous yet. The outer ring of the station was unstable, and the racers had to navigate a narrow path between the collapsing sections. The other racers were not far behind. The pressure was mounting. Zira knew that any mistake, any slip-up, could cost her everything. As she neared the station's collapsing outer ring, her sensors warned her of a rapidly approaching debris field. Pieces of metal were tumbling through space, heading straight for her. Without thinking, Zira adjusted the pod's course, the machine responding instantly to her commands. She darted through the gaps, her hands moving with lightning speed as she adjusted the controls. The pod twisted and turned, narrowly missing a jagged piece of debris. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Zira saw something that made her blood run cold. A huge section of the space station's outer shell was about to break off, sending a massive piece of metal tumbling into her path. She had no choice. There was only one way through, the gap between two large pieces of the wreckage. Zira's heart pounded as she pushed the pod forward, the engines screaming as they accelerated. The gap was small, barely wide enough to fit the pod. She took a deep breath, trusting in the work Jason had done, trusting in herself. With one last burst of speed, Zira sent the pod racing through the gap, feeling the metal scrape against the sides of the cockpit. For a moment, everything seemed to go still. Zira's mind was a blur of calculations and movements, her senses stretched to their limits. But then, just as quickly, she was through. The pod shot out of the other side, free of the wreckage, and the finish line came into view. Zira didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had one goal now, to cross that finish line. She pushed the throttle forward one last time, her mind completely in sync with the pod. The speed, the rush, the thrill. Everything felt perfect. Behind her, Orlin and the other racers were still fighting to catch up, but they were too far behind. Zira had done it. She had overcome every obstacle, every challenge, and now she was about to win. As she neared the finish line, the crowd erupted in cheers. The sound was deafening, and for a moment Zira felt like she was flying, her body and the pod as one. She could see the lights of the stadium flashing, the banners waving in the wind, and the faces of the spectators all looking up at her. When she crossed the finish line, the rush of victory hit her like a tidal wave. She had done it. Zira had won the Starfall circuit, proving to the galaxy that nothing could stop her. She wasn't just a racer anymore. She was a symbol of defiance, of strength, and of resilience. Jason's voice came through the comms, filled with pride. "You did it, Zira. I knew you could." Zira couldn't help but smile. "We did it, Jason. We did it together." But even as the victory sank in, Zira knew that this wasn't the end. The Galactic Council, who had been watching her closely, would likely try to take control of her future. They wouldn't want her to be a symbol of independence. But Zira wasn't worried. She had proven something today. She had shown the galaxy that no one, not even the most powerful political body, could take away her dreams. She had raced against the odds and won, and she would keep racing no matter what. As Zira stood up from the cockpit, the crowd's cheers grew louder. Jason joined her, his face lit up with a grin of pride. Together they had created something beautiful, and the galaxy would remember this day as the moment when humanity, and one brave alien girl, had shown the universe that no challenge was too great. And the best part? This was just the beginning.